is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. No jokes today, because we've got two guests. We are here talking to Rodney Orpheus and Phil Hine about Delinquent Elementals, out now from Stranger Tractor Press. How's it going, guys?
It's going good.
I'm just marveling at your carnage sideshow vocal technique. That was excellent.
Thank you very much. And I'm actually located in a town called Kearney, so it's kind of like a hat on a hat.
We need to get you like a brightly colored top hat, Hambone.
With hair like this, why would I need a hat? But I'd give it a shot.
That's true. That's true.
So why don't you both tell our listeners a little bit about Delinquent Elementals?
Go for it, Rodney.
All right. Well, Delinquent Elementals, it's a compilation album. It's a best of. Back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, Phil and I were editors of a magazine, or as we called it, a newspaper at the time, called Pagan News, which was a fanzine-ish sort of amateur publication celebrating all things pagan and occulty and weird-ass kind of whatever you want to call it, spiritual. From a kind of a amateurish punk rocky perspective, which quite quickly became quite notorious.
Celebrate it.
Yeah, especially because when we brought it out, the Satanic Panic began back then, and we documented the rise of that and its eventual fall.
And this runs, I'm looking at the book right now, from 1988 through 1992. So straight through the panic.
Straight through the panic from its inception to its denouement.
It's a massive book.
Yeah.
You got...
Yeah. And that's just the best of.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We put out an issue every 3 weeks for about 2 years, and then it kind of went bi-monthly and occasional. But we covered a lot of material in that time, and the book represents kind of like our favorite picks of that material.
Right. And we had a lot of other writers, and we did a lot of interviews. And so a lot of people who are quite well known now within the sort of occulty scene got their start working with us. And so we had a lot of input from a lot of different people. We were both young, stupid, and unemployed, so we hadn't anything else to do.
And it started out as sort of like a pre-internet kind of paper internet connecting folks in Britain who were interested in these things, right? Like the earliest iteration of it was like Pagan Link.
The earliest iteration was called Northern Pagan Link News, and it was a free sheet. We ran off master copies on our laser printer and just, either photocopied or sent them out for other people to photocopy. And that way we were able to kind of very quickly reach right across the UK. We even started getting some stuff from America. And then after about 6 months of doing that, we decided to just call it Pagan News and put a price tag on it, which was 30 pence. I don't know how that translates into American currency, but it's fairly cheap,
50 cents or something.
Yeah.
We did it really cheaply, and we took the amazing step of selling advertising in it and actually got some, which never fails to amaze me.
That's cool. Very cool.
Yeah. But I think the internet thing is apropos, because even though we were pre-internet, I had a very, very, one of the very earliest modems, at 1275 baud modem. And very quickly we managed to figure out there was, I managed to hack a mainframe and got myself into a mainframe. And then from there, we jumped into various different bulletin boards that were running. And we used to sit on an evening, if we were bored, we'd hack into some bulletin boards in the US or whatever, and quite quickly found there were pagan bulletin boards, but we also found radical right-wing Christian bulletin boards, and we used to go up there and download all their propaganda, their anti-satanic propaganda, including, of course, apropos to this podcast, Bad. Bothered about Dungeons and Dragons terrible name, terrible organization.
Oh, the worst.
Yeah, and that's how it became like a continuous theme that we were running about the stupidity and inanity of the whole thing.
I have to mention that when you said the word modem, I immediately heard it, like that weird screeching cackle. Like it's like when you say mimeograph, I could smell it, and if you say modem, I can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big umbrella that you kind of had, because it's connecting all of these sort of the punk and the pagan, and just the pagan itself is just a huge umbrella. How did that all work? Was it contentious? Was it friendly? Did everybody get along?
Ha! No.
We were extraordinarily contentious, and we reveled in it.
The pagan scene was not unlike, my background is wargaming. And I remember when fantasy figures first came on the wargaming scene, and there was this, in Britain, there was this huge kind of like outcry against it. You know, these are serious wargamers who spent years trying to convince the public that they're not just men playing with toys, they're doing serious historical reenactment. Then along come all these kids with that elves and dwarves and just, you know, shoot them to pieces. And the occult thing was kind of like that, you know. A lot of really conservative people suddenly up against this new generation who were kind of like, you know, breaking the rules, questioning the dogmas, and taking a piss. And we did all three.
Now, did it help you guys, you know, navigate your way through all of the contentiousness, knowing that you had a very clear blueprint to how pagan news was going to be set up and run, and what your expectations were for the newspaper?
Definitely. I mean, the thing is that we talk about this in the to the book. I mean, when we first started, we sat down and basically made a manifesto of all the things we weren't going to do. Because your average pagan fanzine magazine back then, and there were hundreds of them, all fell into the same milieu, which is basically, you know, you would have a line drawing on the front of some, you know, hippy-dippy looking woman in a diaphanous dress and a crown, riding a unicorn across Stonehenge, and reciting, and then there'd be pages of pagan poetry. It would be like, as I walked across the sand and heard the sounds of Pan, or whatever, you know, and it was just like this utter trash. And we were like, we're having none of that shit. You know, we're getting into actual information, and so, you know, the only illustrations we had were cartoons parodying that whole thing, and we wanted like actual facts and actual reporting, and anything that we wrote that was specifically about occult techniques or whatever, which we also have in there as well, was heavily edited and to the point. And because most books on occultism in general are just terrible. 200, there'll be like 20 pages of info and 180 pages of bullshit.
Awful.
Yeah.
I just purged a whole bunch of books from my occult shelf, basically because I was just like, these are unreadable. I'm never going to read them. Like it just the density of, and by getting rid of like 3 books, I could fit, you know, 10 more small ones, you know.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find really interesting about this is how sort of the occult and, you know, esotericism in general was sort of cross-pollinating into popular culture at that point, partly because of the Satanic Panic, but I think also partly because it was a viable way of talking about the political situation and stuff. So like we spoke a little bit with Phil last week about Hellblazer. I just think it's really interesting that like this fits so nicely with how the British comics were developing and how the role playing scene, like, and broader than just the pagan thing. How do you feel?
Very
like
much so.
You fit in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge comic book fan. Have been. I mean, I learned to read from X-Men and Spider-Man, and I've still got, you know, long boxes full of all the comics I ever had. I still have. Worth quite a lot of money by now, I guess. So I was a huge comic book fan, and we were very aware of the comic book scene, the UK comic book scene. In fact, we interviewed Pat Mills in the magazine, and we actually got featured in British comics as well. Pagan News actually is featured in Crisis, if you remember that comic, which was an amazing British comic book. And one of the stories in that, where the characters are reading it and talking about Pagan News, which chuffed us no end. We were so happy about that. And of course, you had, contemporaneous to us was, we had Alan Moore and Grant Morrison, both of whom were, everything they do is based on their occult, don't want to say beliefs, but their occult background, if you like. I mean, Grant was very much in the same vein as us. And Grant and I are very close friends now, and we didn't know each other at the time, but he was reading Pagan News as well, and that was influencing what he was doing.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so a lot of what he was doing was sparked up in what we were doing, and vice versa. So there was a symbiosis there, very much so. And also in gaming as well. I mean, we're, like Phil mentioned earlier, he comes from we were big gamers and always had been. And we discovered RPGs pretty much the same time as we started Pagan News. And so the whole Pagan News team, we would get together at least a couple of times a week and play RPGs together. And that was part of our whole bonding vibe that we had going on with us. So.
You mentioned when we were emailing back and forth to set this up that you had a long-running Star Trek game.
Yeah, FASA Star Trek was the first RPG that I started playing. I knew a few people who were playing RPGs, but didn't really get into them. And then one day I was in the local Virgin Megastore, and they had just started selling RPGs. And my girlfriend at the time, Janet, who was part of our team, was a huge Trekkie, massive Trekkie. And of course, I love Star Trek as well. And I discovered there was a Star Trek role-playing game. I'm like, whoa! Janet's going to love this. So I picked up FASA Star Trek, and we got together. We started running a Star Trek campaign, and in retrospect, that was one of the best RPGs at the time to start with, for two reasons. One, because it was run on BRP D100, which is a really excellent system. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the great thing about running Star Trek as an RPG is that you don't have to explain anything. Everybody knows how it works. Everybody knows that phasers have a stun setting. Everybody knows you can get beamed down to a planet, and you don't have to explain what a Klingon looks like, depending on which area you're in. But yeah, I mean, everybody knows how Star Trek works. So you can just jump straight in and start playing. Because it's all there, ships go at warp factor 4 or whatever, and Starfleet is what it is, and etc. And so I ran Star Trek for many years off and on. We played it almost every week for multiple years. A massive campaign. Still one of the best campaigns I ever run, I think. I loved it.
I love how it just seems incongruous to me for a bunch of occult folks of all the games to hone in on Star Trek, just because it's science fiction as opposed to horror, I guess. Was there much overlap between the role playing that you were doing and the stuff that was going on in the pagan circles, or did you keep those two things separate? Because I feel like for me personally, back then I was very conscious of keeping the role playing games secret from my cool friends.
Okay. Well, two things on that point. I actually started with original D&D back in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And between 79 and 81, I was doing a degree in psychology. For that degree, I had to do a thesis. So I did my thesis on fantasy role-playing games. And I interviewed loads of people at the local RGB club. And loads of them were kind of like, well, not necessarily into the occult, but kind of like amenable to it. Mm-hmm. So there's that. And I think fantasy role-playing game helped kind of like get people who are kind of like vaguely interested in the occult to be even more vaguely or even less vaguely interested. I mean, we started noodling around with, take, for example, Mr. Spock. You've got a computer problem. Are you going to invoke Hermes or some other mythical Greek god to help you sort out your program? it sort of made sense to us to try. Okay, we're going to do a ritual to invoke Mr. Spock to get that, Spocky kind of like logic, so we can hack DOS or whatever it was in those days. We started doing things like putting Star Trek characters on the Tree of Life.
Love it.
Which later made it into my first book, as when I was trying to explain how the Kabbalah worked. I used Star Trek to show that you had the different characters in Star Trek on the bridge and how they all fit together and how they form a unity that, when there are differences. And that infinite diversity and infinite combination, the model of the Federation, became the model. We used that model ourselves all the time. Yeah. Infinite diversity, infinite combination.
And just like you said with the role-playing game, it does half the work for you because people already understand through exposure to the franchise that...
And very, very many occultists are role-playing gamers because it uses the same kind of functions and the brain where you're visualizing things, you're pretending, a magical ritual, you're pretending to be something you're not and talk to something imaginary as if it's real. And I mean, I'm an atheist, don't get me wrong. I don't believe in gods and goddesses or any of that stuff, but they have the same reality as Star Trek or Lord of the Rings, which is that the entities and the characters and the lore has a complete reality of its own that hangs together and influences us morally and ethically and gives us things that we can...
And emotionally.
Yeah, exactly.
Is this the basic framework? And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm very much a sort of a neophyte with all this stuff, but this sounds like what I understand chaos magic to be sort of framed around.
Kind of, I suppose. It depends on your take on chaos magic, really. Yeah. A contentious feud, let's say. But one of the things that chaos magic did when I was involved in it was it kind of like got very playful with a lot of occult tropes. And, people started, as I say, invoking Mr. Spock or Great Cthulhu or the Spice Girls or whoever. And again, that upset a lot of your traditional occultists who were like, this isn't proper occultism. This is just messing it about. And I think, well, how much proper occultism, in inverted commas, is actually messing about anyway. So we might as well, have fun while we're doing it.
Right. We kind of exploded a lot of those myths that were around and took great glee in doing that. But from a place of actually loving it and caring about it. We wanted to explode those kind of myths because we wanted to drill down to what the essence of it really was and how it worked. Still something we're trying to do to this day.
So knowing that, drilling it down to the place you were trying to get it to, do you think that the fact that you also, made it humorous in a way and kind of, took the piss out of it a little bit?
A little bit. Oh.
A lot.
Like as you're familiar, a possible delinquent, try our super Soraway quiz. Like that's the kind of stuff that, as a reader, even when you are talking about complex ideas and trying to kind of work through these thoughts, like that's the kind of shit that keeps me engaged, because it kind of makes it feel less like a textbook reading or a thesis and more like hey, I'm just having a conversation with a buddy and we're kind of and I think that one of the really cool things about this is it does in a lot of ways feel like your buddy's got some cool ideas, he's kind of hipping you to these cool ideas as you're kind of going along with it. So you think that like kind of put off a lot of the more serious folks when you did that?
No, it didn't. They would get enraged, but they would keep buying it every month.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one guy saying to me, I don't always agree with what you say, but I'm glad you're saying it.
It really was like the internet.
Yeah,
no, exactly. No, yeah. I think we identified very early on what's now known as FOMO. Which is that we wanted to make the thing so compulsive that even if you hated it, you couldn't ignore it. You had to keep reading it because you never knew what was going to happen or who we were going to satirize this week. We wanted to make it completely unmissable, and that was very much one of the design philosophy behind it. It had to be super engaging, and it had to be really, really funny, but it had to actually have some really good, solid information, and B, the kind of thing, if you didn't read it, you felt like you were missing out. And that's why, I mean, we had for a zine, for especially a pagan zine, we had an enormous circulation at one point at our peak. And we became very super influential. I mean, especially when the Satanic Panic really started to hit, we would turn on the TV and see people being interviewed. We would see politicians being interviewed in Parliament, and they'd have a copy of Pagan News on the desk in front of them. Journalists were reading it, radio DJs were reading it, and we got to the point where we were setting the conversation, not just reporting on it, and we were super happy about that. Because one of the things that I'm still very proud of is that we were the only people, and I do mean the only people, who took it head on. Everybody else tried to appease. A lot of the occult organizations we knew were like, oh yeah, well, we're the nice ones. We're not those nasty Satanists who are actually raping children and eating babies. And we're like, no, that's not what you don't do that, And they would inadvertently, by trying to like save themselves, they inadvertently were dooming themselves, because they didn't realize that to these like idiots, we were all Satanists. As far as they were concerned, we were all Satanists. All of us, everybody in this discussion, we were all Satanists. If you had a copy of the D&D Player's Handbook in your house, boom, you were done. Like as Damien Eccles could quite clearly attest, because he ended up on death row for owning a copy of D&D and a couple of Aleister Crowley books. And we were the people that went like, no, this is all bullshit. It's all bullshit. And also, one thing I'm proud of is that we were actually saying, why are they doing this? And we quite quickly came up with the only real explanation of any sense to us is that they were the ones doing the child abuse, and the whole thing was massive projection, both psychologically in their own heads and also as a protective form. And of course, guess who proved to be right there? Because now we all know, like, every single week you see some Roman Catholic priest or Christian pastor or Republican gets arrested for child abuse. Back then, that didn't happen. Back then, it was still like, it was a big no-no. But we went on the attack.
So, I mean, you ceased publication in 1992. It's 33 years later. How do you feel kind of looking back at this, knowing that the more things change, the more things stay the same?
I've been thinking all morning about how to ask this question.
Yeah, I mean, because it's like, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, but just now with like a villain mustache and a supercuts haircut. Like, so many things that you touch upon in this newspaper, it's almost become a prophecy being fulfilled.
Well, that was one of the reasons why we wanted to bring the book out now, because we saw this coming round again, and we had all the stuff that was in the background. There's a whole new generation of people. I mean, we were meeting kids who didn't even know the Satanic Panic had happened, and they literally couldn't believe it, that this was what it was. And so we got together and said, like, let's republish this. Let's get it out again. So we go on the historical record, because those who do not remember the past are doomed to repeat it.
Yep.
And we wanted to make sure that we had this history there, because we had a very unique, on the ground, as it happened perspective. And I think makes quite compulsive reading. And yeah, I mean, it's all coming around again. Absolutely. There's no question about it. Here we are.
I see it equated to the idea of like when a Nazi goes into your bar, you got to punch him in the nose and make sure that he never comes back.
The Nazi bar metaphor, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is it the same thing with the Satanic Panic? If you had not punched them back in the nose, would it have gone away on its own? Would it have fizzled out naturally? Or did it need to have the direct pushback?
I think it did kind of fizzle out after people got pissed off generally with social workers sweeping down on isolated communities indoors, raising, taking kids away and blathering about satanic child abuse and never actually producing any evidence. And television documentaries that purported to show the truth but actually turned out to be complete bullshit. by the time we get to about 1992, there's actually a kind of tipping point where, the fever pitch is dying down. People are becoming more critical of it. By about mid 1992, the government are actually commissioning a professor of religious studies to do a survey of it and basically debunk the whole thing once and for all. What we were doing was kind of like providing a pagan pushback, and I think that had huge effects. Like, for me, one of the big things is that before the Satanic Panic, I would say the majority of pagans and occultists had no idea whatsoever how to talk to the media. They'd go on a TV show and just waffle and get cut off after about 2 minutes of and what that Satanic Panic did was produce a generation of people, if you like, who were media savvy and media aware and aware of the necessity of getting their views across in a succinct way to the general public. And I think that actually, helped a lot.
This is where I think our views diverge. I think Phil's taken a too positive view of it here. I think some things we have to remember is like, the West Memphis Three did 18 years in death. Damien Atkins did 18 years in death row because of the Satanic Panic. I mean, it's very clear that those 3 kids were completely innocent, and it still took them 18 years to get out.
And that happened fairly late in the cycle of things, too.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I mean, but there were also there were school teachers in America arrested for satanic abuse of their kids with zero evidence whatsoever, and the whole thing was hyped up. And there were a couple who were put away and only got out 4 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And they spent that entire time. They spent 20 something years in jail for a crime that didn't exist, literally never happened. And they only just got out. And they hadn't seen each other. They were put in separate prisons. They hadn't seen each other in over 20 years. And even though the Satanic Panic was supposedly exploded, nobody went back to that jail and said, hey guys, sorry, maybe you shouldn't be here.
Yeah,
so,
well, I was talking about the UK case.
The UK was a little bit fairer, and it didn't have quite the insanity of the US, although they were trying. But I think how the UK one ended was when they did a dawn raid on, I think it was the Hebrides or the Isle of Skye or somewhere. It was some remote Orkney. That was it. Yeah. It was an Orkney. They did a dawn raid in Orkney and pulled all these kids away from their parents and took them away because of Satanism. And they decided that they would do a big press thing around it. And so they invited journalists along to the raid, and the BBC were there. And I remember switching on the radio in the morning when I woke up, and the BBC were reporting live from the raid. And it turns out that the community they raided them from were Quakers, which is a very long and proud history in the US and the UK. Yep. And they were interviewing the mother of 2 kids who'd just been snatched. And she was like, they were like, so are you a Satanist? She was like, no, I'm from the Society of Friends. And she had this beautiful voice. She was like, I'm from the Society of Friends. That you might know us as Quakers. This is a Quaker community, and we're completely confused. We don't understand what's going on. And they started talking, and the BBC got it. They realized they had something, but that they had magic happening in real time. And they were like, so what's going on here? And she started, well, we don't know. I mean, my children being taken away. No one will tell us what's happening. I think we're going to be arrested now, which we don't understand. I mean, we're pacifists here, well, have you done satanic rituals? No. I mean, or we go to church on Sunday and we sit there in silence and we pray to Jesus. And so we don't understand it. And I remember listening, and I was like, okay, this is over now. Because she had completely demolished every cliche in that one interview. And sure enough, that went before a judge, and the judge absolutely castigated the social workers and the cops, and basically said if the cops brought anything like this in front of his bench again, they were going to jail. And all the social workers would go to jail. And he laid down a precedent saying, you come before me with this bullshit again, you're all going to jail. And that stopped it dead in its tracks. After that, it was pretty much over as a force. But it did take that. I mean, there were 94 kids being held away from their parents at one point in the UK alone. I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of kids were taken from their parents in the US. But I know at one point there were 94 in the UK.
Oh, the other big thing was dispatches, Rodney.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you want to talk about that, or shall I?
Go ahead.
Okay. Channel 4, early in, I think, February 92, did this big media splash. They'd found video evidence of satanic rituals going on. And there was a big splash in all the broadsheets, including some very kind of like left-leaning broadsheets. And then they aired this program, and they showed this video that was very kind of like, what the hell's going on here? And they had a kind of Christian talking head on saying, well, this is evidence of an abortion being carried out in a basement. So that all kind of like brouhaha lasted for about a week. And then several journalists turned up the interesting fact that the video that purported to show a satanic ritual going on was actually an experimental film with voiceover by Derek Jarman that had actually been commissioned by Channel 4, the same people who did this documentary, a few years ago. That just kind of, this final stab at trying to come up with evidence, again, just blow the whole thing out of the water. It was a huge embarrassment for the forces of evil. Oh, we've got this video evidence. Actually, no, it's an experimental film that Channel 4 actually paid to be produced.
See, like pre-internet, and I can't speak to it in the UK, but in the US, you would have almost a telephone game amongst parents. Mm-hmm. Where they'd hear something from someone who heard it from somebody, and then they would be like, well, Johnny, you can't do this because, my friend's kid and blah, 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 blah,
mm-hmm.
They did this and they died. And my mom kept doing that to me. I'm like, well, which friend? I know all your friends. She's like, well, no, it's not it's my friend's kid. And I was like, well, who's the kid? I was like, what school did they go to? And then finally hit a point where I was like, Mom, I need to see a body. Mm-hmm. She's like, what? And I was like, where's the obituary?
Mm-hmm.
Because we didn't have the internet at that point that I could look it up. Right. I'm like, I said, Mom, no body, no crime. I was like, don't come to me anymore unless you could show me this person's actually dead. And I got grounded. But then she stopped talking to me about this kind of shit.
Yeah, I mean, we thought in our wonderful naivety in the early days of the internet that having this kind of information exchange and having the entire world's knowledge available at our fingertips would mean that people would get educated and shit like this wouldn't happen anymore. And boy, were we wrong.
Fucking A, right.
Well, it was working for a minute, and then...
It was working for a minute, yeah.
Yeah. then everything got bought up and weaponized with algorithms.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Shit. But I don't think that there was ever a real moment in the U.S. where it blew up like that, where there was a definitive, like, this is all nonsense. I feel like it just sort of, there was a news cycle exhaustion for the story, but it never really went away.
No, it became an industry.
Yeah.
Just like BAD generated an anti-role-playing games industry. There were films and books about the whole thing. The same thing happened with the Satanic Panic. People started building livelihoods around, selling videos and books and shit.
Yeah, but what happened in the US is that the FBI investigated it. What was it, Kenneth?
Lanning, the Lanning report.
Kenneth Lanning, the Lanning report. And he was a very high up FBI guy, profiler, and he did a report into all of the accusations to do the definitive FBI report. And he found out, he was an excellent agent, he found out very quickly that it was all bullshit. And so he wrote a very long and detailed report for the FBI that basically said, this is shit, we need to stop it, getting involved in it. And basically instructed the FBI that to just drop anything like this, and also rebuke any local police officers who were bringing this to them. So that stopped it at the FBI level. And, without the FBI to investigate, then it lost a lot of its teeth. So God bless Kenneth Lanning for doing that. It was a very well put together report.
I have a couple videos that are law enforcement training videos for how to.
God.
Yeah, exactly. That are like how to identify satanic crimes and stuff like that. And the best part about it is that they are absolutely. It's just like all the religious conservative anti-Dungeons and Dragons material. It's like they hate the game, but they have no idea what they're talking about. They're not describing the game that the players know. And it's the same thing with the occultism in these videos. It's just you're talking about Black Sabbath album covers. Like that's your touchstone. You're not at all engaged with the actual substance of the thing. You're putting just a hodgepodge of nonsense together and being scared by it.
Well, again, when the British Satanic Panic kicked off, a lot of the American stuff, came over here. They started disseminating it to police forces and social workers and other childcare agencies, and they basically trained people. Oh, if your kid is scared of folks, he's been satanically abused. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons. There wasn't really the same kind of thing happening in the UK. Apropos of fancy role-playing games that you had with Bad, there was a kind of like a little bit, but nothing on the scale of what happened in the States.
Yeah. With the police videos, though, they become like a lingering poison, though, because like some cops believe this crap, and because nobody told them to stop believing that crap, and because police are regarded as the arbiters of good society and all that, often erroneously, and they I'm gonna get some nasty letters in response to this podcast.
Well, I think it's important to point out that there is definitely a difference between Europe and the US when it comes to the police, because in Europe, if you want to become a police officer, you're doing like a minimum 2 years at a university level training.
It's great.
In the US, you basically get your cop license from a bubblegum machine, as far as I can figure out. Right, it's 2 months of training, and they're idiots. I mean, I think there's actually in some law enforcement areas in the US, there's actually an upper limit of intelligence that you cannot go beyond to become a police officer. I'm not making this up. So there's a lot of very dumbass local police officers in the US, and that's just a fact. They're not trained to anything like the level that a European police officer would be. So, but they're still treated as being the arbiters of the law, and in which case, and in cases where a lot of police officers have no clue about the law whatsoever.
Right. Let alone occultism.
No, let alone occultism.
Yeah.
Well, they all come from some small town where they're going to church every Sunday, and some pastors up there thumping the Bible and telling them it's okay to be a racist, idiot, fascist, whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
and here we are in modern America.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. loves a pivot, right? And I really, I'm a firm believer in it. All kind of really, in my lifetime, in my time when I was aware of it, like it started in the mid '80s with like the PMRC and Satan in the music, right?
Backmasking,
backmasking,
crazy stuff, yeah. And then you got Zappa, and you got Dee Schneider, and then John Denver shows up, and John Denver they take the L. So then they moved on to now it's in these books. Now it's in these books with dragons and dungeons and all this other bullshit. And then eventually the feds come along and they take the L. And now they got to pivot to something else. So now they're mad at Bill Clinton for getting a blowjob. Because
actually they moved to video games.
With the video games in between?
Violence in video games begets violence in real life.
Yeah. That video games cause violence, even though every study ever made shows that video games reduce violence. But hey, let's not let facts get in the way of a good theory.
And through all the pivots, though, they never actually... They take the L, they move on to something else. They never actually acknowledge it. There's just carnage everywhere when it comes to this stuff.
Absolutely. But I think it's also important to remember that all these conferences, because as Phil pointed out earlier, how this thing was disseminated, it didn't get disseminated through law enforcement and social workers by accident. It was a very consciously designed strategy. So what these right-wing lunatics would do back then was they would hold a big conference, and it could be a free conference where they would create some organization with a fancy name, like the Protection of Children League or whatever the hell, something that sounds fancy, but it's actually like three guys, from Boise, Idaho or whatever. And they would launch a big conference and they'd say, this is a conference for law enforcement and social workers. And they would just go to, they would go to whatever, the local yellow pages or whatever of bumfuck, Indiana. And they would look up all the names of all the social worker organizations and all the cop stations. And they would send them flyers saying, hey, this is an important law enforcement organization. We're doing a safeguarding conference to train, and it's free, blah, blah, blah. And of course, people would look at it and go like, oh, that sounds interesting. Yeah, I should go to that. It's a free conference. And I can get a day off work to go to go sit in the Regency Hotel. And that's what they did. And they have a day-long conference where they present the, inverted commas, evidence and show how to find these things. And so all these people would go back to their place of work later the next day and go like, hey, guess what I just learned? We need to be looking out for this. And they'd just believe it because they would assume that the authority was telling them that this is what they had to do. And they didn't even look at the fact that the guy telling them, in many cases had already been arrested themselves for child abuse. They never even looked beyond that they were being told this by the very people that they should have been arresting. But they did this and they networked this massively, and it was very, very successful. And they kept it very much under the radar, so that a lot of law enforcement, a lot of social workers, doctors, whatever, were heavily influenced by this stuff and trained specifically to do it. And they did that right across the USA. Then they spread it to the UK, and they were trying to get it into the rest of Europe. They were moving along and building this whole movement until it stopped. But, and here's the kicker, they still hold those conferences.
Oh, yeah, because, an expert
Yeah.
who is learned will never be as confident or charismatic as a grifter.
Yeah. Absolutely. 100%.
I mean, even after the panic kind of died down in '92 in the UK, I'm talking about, there were various efforts to kickstart it. And when we were doing Delinquent Elementals, I ended up writing about 60,000 words on the whole thing, including a lot of material about the American panic. But unfortunately, we had to cut that down to 10,000 words. Otherwise, the book would have been even longer.
Yeah.
And the book is 670 something pages, right?
656, which we only realized too late. We should have put another 10 pages in.
Right.
Leave them blank. Write your own notes in, folks.
Yeah.
Well, Rodney, Phil, it's been fantastic chatting with you. Delinquent Elementals, a pagan news anthology, is out now by Strange Attractor Press. I mean, we've been chatting for an hour. Normally we do a bit shorter episodes, but the conversation's great. I can't recommend this enough, especially if you've always been curious about or wanted to know more about the Satanic Panic from people who actually experienced it. This has been great, guys. I'm loving this. Where can people find your work on the internet?
I'm the only Rodney Orpheus in the world, so
Must be nice.
type Rodney Orpheus into Google and you'll find my RodneyOrpheus.com or Facebook, Instagram. Social media is my thing. So you can find me anywhere and look up what I do. And I also make music. I'm a professional musician. You can look at my band, the Cassandra Complex. We just finished a 49-date, 13-country world tour. So that's my other thing. So yeah, do check me out. Phil?
Okay. Well, you can find me on Facebook if you look really hard, or Blue Sky. Got an account on X, but I'm not really there. Other than that, I've written a whole bunch of books on various occult weirdness that are available from original Falcon Press or via the evil Amazon Empire. I've self-published quite a bit. And other than that, I've got a blog called Enfolding Org, which is mostly me writing about various occult weirdness and this and that and the other, whatever takes my fancy, really. But yeah, do hassle your local bookstore to get a copy of Delinquent Elementals, because it's the bollocks.
Mm-hmm. And we still play a lot of RPGs.
Yeah. I
feel like we didn't even talk about RPGs.
I know, like we should talk about RPGs. God damn it, what's going on?
We'll have you back on.
Okay, next time we'll just talk about RPGs.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I can guarantee you, as much hate mail as we're going to get for some of the things that we talked about, we are going to get equal, if not more, people being like psyched to hear from you all again. So yeah, that's not bullshit. We will definitely want to chat more in the future. Probably about RPGs, because it is our bread and butter.
All right.
Yeah, it's another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me on vintagerpg.com, where this podcast will be, and there'll be posts. There's plenty of posts about the Satanic Panic as it relates to music and Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games on there. If you search for Satanic Panic, there's a companion writing right there waiting for you.
Huzzah! You can find me at hamandeggpublishing.com. There's a link to the Discord where, if you want to catch me, that you're not going to find me on social media, you're going to find me at hamandeggpublishing.com. On my Discord, you can get books from 321 RPG. You can get copies of Zombie Brain Eaters. You can get copies of Crowdfund Your Fucking Life there as well. And probably within the next couple weeks, you'll be able to finally buy The Hotel Exorcist. We're just about to ship those out to the backers. So check that out. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We got a behind-the-scenes look at the stuff Stu's working on. We got a behind-the-scenes look at the stuff I'm working on. For as little as $1 a month, you can get early release episodes, probably at like Friday or Saturday, depending on when we record them in the week. We've also got a killer Discord community we'd love for you to be a part of. At the $5 tier, you can get into my RPGs that I'll run. I run random shit every month. Stu is at the $10 tier, where you can get in on his legendary and very deadly West Marches campaign. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor. Thanks for listening. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dead Go West. Art by Schaefer Brown. Edited by R. Alex Murray. Check us out at vintagerpg.com.